A former secret agent escapes his violent past to live a peaceful life on a secluded ranch. But when a ruthless cartel arrives demanding his land, he is forced to become the man he swore never to be again. Now, with his wife taken and his home under siege, he has only one choice: fight back or lose everything. But what he doesn't know is, they were never just after his land. The sun rose lazily over the horizon, bathing the fields in a golden glow. Lucas Duarte stepped onto the porch of his farmhouse, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, and inhaled the crisp morning air. The vast expanse of his land stretched before him, rolling green pastures, wooden fences tracing the contours of the hills, and a dense tree line marking the border of his property. The ranch was secluded, nestled near the frontier, far from the noise and chaos of the cities. He took a sip, feeling the warmth of the drink spread through him. The morning routine was sacred, a moment of quiet before the day's work began. The rhythmic sound of hooves against the earth signaled the approach of Raimundo, the ranch's longtime caretaker. The older man, with his weathered face and steady gait, led a pair of horses toward the stables. "Another fine morning, boss," Raimundo greeted, his voice carrying the wisdom of years spent under the sun. Lucas nodded. "That it is." Though they rarely spoke at length, their bond was one of deep understanding. Raimundo had been there long before Lucas arrived, and his loyalty was unwavering. From inside the house, the faint sound of clinking dishes echoed. Sophia was already up, preparing breakfast. Lucas smiled to himself, savoring the sense of normalcy. Their life here was simple, predictable, just the way he liked it. But things had changed lately. Small, almost imperceptible shifts had disrupted the usual peace of the ranch. He had spotted tire tracks near the western fence, deep grooves in the dirt that didn't belong to any of their vehicles. Occasionally, he noticed shadows moving beyond the tree line at night, too far to make out clearly, but close enough to unsettle him. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia. The mind played tricks in such isolation. But then came the sounds, distant engines rumbling in the dead of night, gunshots echoing faintly across the valley. It was always far enough away to ignore, but close enough to remind him that danger wasn't as distant as he wanted to believe. He kept these thoughts to himself. There was no need to alarm Sophia, nor burden Raimundo with speculation. If trouble came, he would handle it. "Lucas, breakfast is ready!" Sophia's voice rang from the kitchen. He walked inside, greeted by the scent of freshly baked bread and scrambled eggs. Sophia stood by the stove, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes bright as she glanced over her shoulder. "You were out there thinking again?" she teased, placing a plate on the table. "Just enjoying the view," he replied, though she saw through him. Sophia had always been perceptive. It was one of the things he loved about her, but it also meant she sensed when something was off. He avoided her gaze, focusing instead on his food. The day passed in routine, checking the fences, tending to the cattle, small repairs around the ranch. The work was demanding but fulfilling, grounding him in the present. By evening, as the sky darkened to shades of violet and orange, Lucas stood by the porch again, hands resting on the wooden railing. The land stretched out before him, peaceful yet somehow expectant. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, and in the distance he swore he saw movement. Not an animal, something or someone was watching. He exhaled slowly. For now, he would let it be. But deep down, he knew this peace wouldn't last forever. The night was calm, the kind of silence only found in isolated places like Lucas Duarte's ranch. Crickets sang in the tall grass, and the wind whispered through the trees. Inside the house, Sophia slept peacefully, curled up under the blankets. Lucas, however, sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the whiskey in his glass. Something felt off, then he heard it, a low, distant rumble. Faint at first, but growing louder. Engines, multiple. Lucas set his glass down and moved to the window. The moonlight revealed a cloud of dust rising from the dirt road leading to his ranch. Trucks, at least 5 of them, were heading straight for his home. He clenched his jaw. He had seen enough in his past life to recognize when trouble was coming. By the time he stepped onto the porch, Raimundo was already outside, shotgun in hand. The old man gave him a knowing look. "Visitors?" Lucas didn't answer. The truck skidded to a stop in the open field before the house, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Doors flew open, and men poured out. Too many to count at first glance. They carried rifles, their postures confident, aggressive. Then from the lead vehicle, a man stepped out. Miguel Navarro, El Cobra, as he was known in the underworld, had a reputation as ruthless as his nickname suggested. He was tall, lean, his black leather jacket fitting snugly over a crisp button-down. His presence radiated authority, the kind that made men kill without question. He lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke before stepping forward. Lucas met him halfway, his expression unreadable. Miguel smiled. "Señor Duarte." His voice was smooth, almost friendly. "You have a beautiful home." Lucas didn't react. "What do you want?" Miguel chuckled. "Straight to business. I like that." He gestured around. "You see, my men and I, we need a place away from prying eyes. Your ranch is perfect, secluded, spacious, close to the border. A good location for," he paused, tilting his head, "operations." Lucas remained still, but his muscles tensed. "I'm making you an offer," Miguel continued. "You and your lovely wife can stay. You can keep the farm running. We won't interfere much. In exchange, you let us use your land. Trucks come and go, no questions asked." He took a drag of his cigarette. Simple. Lucas didn't blink. "And if I refuse?" Miguel's smile faded. "Then I take it anyway." Silence stretched between them. The men behind Miguel shifted, gripping their weapons. Raimundo's fingers tightened around his shotgun. Lucas exhaled slowly. "You're asking me to give up my home." "I'm asking you to be smart," Miguel corrected. "You have 48 hours to decide." His gaze darkened. "After that, we take what we need, with or without your cooperation." Lucas held his ground, meeting Miguel's eyes without fear. The cartel leader smirked. "I like you, Duarte. You have spine." He flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushing it under his boot. "Think it over." With a snap of his fingers, his men climbed back into their trucks. Engines roared to life, and one by one, the vehicles turned, kicking up dust as they sped off into the night. Lucas stood motionless, watching the red taillights disappear into the darkness. Raimundo finally spoke. "They'll be back." Lucas nodded. "I know." He turned toward the house, knowing that when morning came, he would have a decision to make, one that could change everything. Lucas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of Miguel Navarro's ultimatum pressed against his chest like a tightening vice. Sophia lay beside him, her breath steady in sleep, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. 48 hours. His mind drifted, pulling him backward through time. Memories long buried resurfacing like ghosts. A hotel room in Bogota. The bitter scent of gunpowder and blood in the air. His hands steady as he disassembled a sniper rifle. The body of a cartel enforcer sprawled across the bed. He had been younger then, colder. A ghost moving through shadows, delivering justice that never truly existed. He had promised himself that life was over. Lucas sat up, running a hand over his face. He needed air. Slipping out of bed, he stepped onto the porch, the night breeze cool against his skin. The ranch stretched before him in darkness, but his senses were sharp, alert. A lifetime of training didn't simply fade away. He scanned the tree line, searching for movement, listening for anything out of place. Nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched remained, a soft creak behind him. "You're awake." Sophia's voice was quiet, laced with concern. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a light shawl, her hair cascading over one shoulder. "Couldn't sleep," Lucas admitted. She stepped closer, studying his face. "You've been different these past few days." Lucas turned away. "It's nothing," Sophia sighed, leaning against the railing beside him. "Don't lie to me, Lucas." Her voice was firm, yet gentle. "I see it in your eyes. You're hiding something." He hesitated. The truth teetered on the edge of his tongue, but he swallowed it back. Telling her meant exposing everything. The missions, the blood on his hands. The real reason they had built a quiet life so far from civilization. Before he could respond, Raimundo's voice broke the silence. "Boss?" Lucas turned. The old ranch hand stood by the barn, his expression tense. "You should see this." Lucas and Sophia followed him across the yard. Raimundo pointed to the dirt near the fence line. Fresh tire tracks, deep and deliberate. Someone had been watching them. "They didn't come up to the house," Raimundo said. "But they were here. I don't like it." Lucas crouched, running his fingers over the imprint. He already knew who it was. Miguel's men, reminding him that time was running out. Sophia's arms crossed over her chest. "Lucas, what's going on?" He straightened, locking eyes with her. The worry in her gaze made something inside him twist. He had kept this secret for so long, built a life on the foundation of a lie. But now the past was knocking at his door. "I'll handle it," he said finally. Sofia didn't look convinced. Neither did Raimundo. As they returned to the house, Lucas glanced once more at the dark horizon. The memories were clawing their way back to the surface, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he could keep them buried. The morning was unnervingly quiet. The usual sounds of the ranch, birds chirping, horses neighing in the distance, the rhythmic creak of the windmill felt muted, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Lucas sensed it before he saw it. A change in the air, the kind of tension that had once warned him of ambushes in a past life he had tried to forget. He stood on the porch, eyes scanning the fields. Raimundo was by the barn, tending to the horses, while Sofia sat at the kitchen table inside, sipping her coffee in silence. None of them spoke much that morning. They all felt it. Then came the gunfire. The first shots shattered the silence like thunderclaps. Sofia gasped, dropping her cup as glass exploded from the windows. Lucas grabbed her, pulling her down behind the heavy oak table just as bullets tore through the walls. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice firm but controlled. Raimundo was outside. Lucas gritted his teeth, adrenaline surging through him as he reached for the shotgun by the door. He peeked through the broken window. Figures moved near the barn, dark silhouettes against the rising dust. Miguel's men. More shots rang out, this time from Raimundo. The old man had taken cover behind a haystack, returning fire with practiced precision, but he was outnumbered. Lucas made a decision. Grabbing his revolver, he moved swiftly, using the porch's cover to advance. The moment he reached the barn side, a man turned his rifle toward him. Lucas didn't hesitate. 2 precise shots, and the attacker crumpled. Another lunged toward him, but Lucas sidestepped, slamming his elbow into the man's throat before delivering a brutal kick to his ribs. The man hit the ground unconscious. Sofia watched from inside, her breath caught in her chest. The Lucas she knew was careful, calm, peaceful. But this was someone else, someone she had never seen before. More men charged forward, but Lucas moved like a ghost, calculated and lethal. A third attacker swung a machete at him, but Lucas caught his wrist, twisting with practiced ease until he heard the sickening snap of bone. The man screamed before Lucas knocked him out cold. Behind him, Raimundo fired another shot, hitting a fuel canister by the barn. Flames erupted as the gasoline ignited, the fire spreading rapidly. Lucas barely had time to react before another bullet whizzed past his head. One of the men raised his rifle toward Raimundo. Lucas fired first. The attacker collapsed, lifeless. Then just as quickly as it started, the gunfire ceased. The few remaining men scrambled back into their trucks, retreating in a cloud of dust and exhaust. The warning was clear. Miguel was done waiting. Lucas turned to Raimundo, who clutched his arm, a graze wound bleeding through his shirt. "I'm fine," the older man grunted, shaking Lucas off. Sofia stepped out onto the porch, eyes wide, breath shaky. Her gaze locked onto Lucas. Not just the man she had married, but the man she had never truly known. Lucas exhaled, lowering his weapon. The past he had buried was no longer hidden. The morning after the attack smelled of smoke and gunpowder. The barn was still smoldering, its roof partially collapsed from the fire. Ash drifted through the air, settling over the ranch like a thin veil of ruin. Lucas stood in the middle of it all, his gaze scanning the wreckage. This had only been a warning. Next time, Miguel wouldn't leave room for them to breathe. "We need to be ready," Lucas muttered. Raimundo, his arm hastily bandaged, stepped beside him. "They'll come back stronger." Lucas nodded. "Then we make sure they regret it." Building the fortress. By midday, the work had begun. Lucas and Raimundo moved through the ranch with purpose, reinforcing every weak point. The house was the priority. Windows were boarded up, doors strengthened, vantage points established. Lucas scouted the land, marking choke points, places where an ambush could work in their favor. He took stock of what they had: old hunting rifles, a few shotguns, ammunition. Nothing close to the firepower Miguel's men had, but Lucas knew how to turn the terrain itself into a weapon. At the western fence line, he and Raimundo dug trenches, filling them with wooden stakes. Tripwires were set up with flares to alert them of movement. Near the barn ruins, Lucas rigged an old propane tank, its nozzle loosened. If anyone got too close, one shot would turn it into an inferno. As he worked, a familiar pair of eyes burned into his back. Confrontation. Sofia watched from the porch, arms crossed. She had been quiet since the attack. But now she approached, her steps deliberate. "Lucas," she called. He paused, turning to face her. "What the hell was that yesterday?" she demanded, her voice tight with something between fear and anger. Lucas exhaled. He had expected this. "That was me keeping us alive." "That wasn't you," she countered. "Not the you I know." She searched his face, frustration growing. "Who are you, Lucas?" He hesitated. He could lie. He could tell her it was just instinct, just survival. But the look in her eyes told him she wouldn't believe it. "I was someone else before," he admitted. "Someone I buried a long time ago." Sophia swallowed hard. "Before what?" He looked away, jaw tightening. "Before us." She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. "So what now? You just become that person again?" "If that's what it takes to keep you safe," he said simply. Sophia shook her head. "I don't even know who I married." Lucas flinched at her words, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stepped past her, heading back toward the defenses. There was no time for doubt. The final preparations. By nightfall, the ranch looked different. Less like a home, more like a battlefield waiting for a war. The once open, welcoming land was now a death trap for anyone who dared cross it. Lucas stood by the porch, scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there, Miguel was preparing, gathering his men. Sophia sat inside, her back to him. She hadn't spoken since their argument. Raimundo cleaned his shotgun, eyes grim. Lucas clenched his fists. He had sworn never to be this man again. But the past had a way of pulling him back. And this time, there was no running. The night was heavy with anticipation. The air, thick and humid, carried an unnatural silence. Even the insects seemed to sense what was coming. Lucas stood on the porch, his rifle resting against the railing, eyes scanning the dark horizon. Raimundo sat nearby, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. "They'll come soon," he murmured. Lucas nodded. "Yeah." Inside, Sophia sat at the dining table, arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't spoken much since their argument. The distance between them felt wider than ever, but there was no time to fix it now. Then, the first explosion came, a deafening blast from the west fence. The tripwire flares ignited, sending streaks of orange light into the sky. Shadows moved beyond the tree line, dozens of them. Miguel had arrived. The assault begins. Gunfire erupted from the darkness. Lucas ducked behind the porch railing, firing back with precision. Raimundo took cover near the barn's remains, his shotgun booming with each pull of the trigger. The traps worked. The trenches slowed them down, the wooden stakes impaling careless attackers. A second explosion rang out as one of Miguel's men triggered the propane trap, engulfing part of the field in flames. But they kept coming. More men than before, better armed, more determined. Lucas moved fast, weaving through the shadows, taking out enemies with ruthless efficiency. This was his world, the calculated chaos of battle. Then he heard Sophia scream, the capture. His heart slammed against his ribs. He turned toward the house, catching a glimpse of Sophia struggling against two men. One of them, larger and wearing a black vest, locked an arm around her neck. Lucas raised his rifle, but a voice stopped him cold. "Lower it, amigo." Miguel stepped onto the porch, a pistol pressed against Sophia's temple. She gasped, her wide eyes locking onto Lucas. Everything froze. "Drop it," Miguel said, his tone almost amused. "Or she dies." Lucas's finger twitched on the trigger. His instincts screamed at him to act, to find an opening, but there wasn't one. Sophia whimpered as Miguel tightened his grip. Lucas let out a slow breath, then lowered his rifle, placing it on the ground. Miguel grinned. Good choice. Behind him, his men regrouped, some wounded, others furious. The attack had cost them, but Miguel had won the upper hand. Lucas's fists clenched as Miguel stepped back, dragging Sophia with him. "We're leaving," Miguel declared. "And you have one last chance to make the right decision, Duarte." His eyes glowed with satisfaction. 48 hours. Bring yourself to me, or she dies." Then, in a whirlwind of movement, they were gone. Sophia, the remaining men, and the lingering echo of their victory. Lucas stood in the ruins of his home, fists trembling. For the first time in years, rage clawed its way back to the surface. And this time, he wouldn't suppress it. The world around Lucas blurred into insignificance. The only thing that mattered was Sophia, taken, threatened, in the hands of a man who had no mercy. Raimundo watched him from the barn's entrance, his face grim. "What do we do, boss?" Lucas's hands curled into fists. There was no question about what had to be done. The only thing left was how. A past he can no longer hide inside the house, Lucas moved with purpose, opening a locked cabinet near the fireplace. Raimundo watched as he pulled out a heavy black duffel bag. The old man raised an eyebrow. "I knew you weren't just some rancher," Raimundo muttered. Lucas didn't answer. He unzipped the bag, revealing a set of weapons: 2 handguns, extra ammunition, a combat knife, and something Raimundo recognized immediately, a suppressed submachine gun. Raimundo let out a low whistle. "You've been holding out on me," Lucas exhaled. "I was trying to leave this behind, but the past had finally caught up to him. Sophia deserved the truth." Lucas grabbed his gear and moved to the kitchen, where he poured himself a glass of whiskey. His hands were steady, his mind focused. But when he turned, he saw Raimundo watching him, waiting. "You should tell me everything," the old man said. Lucas sighed, taking a slow sip before nodding. "Before this," he gestured to the ranch. "Before Sophia, I was someone else, a government asset, special operations. My job was to hunt men like Miguel." Raimundo nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you quit?" Lucas let out a dry chuckle. "You don't quit that life, you just disappear." Raimundo leaned back against the wall, considering the weight of those words. "And now?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "Now I stop hiding." A message from Miguel. Before Raimundo could respond, a vehicle approached the house. Lucas was on his feet instantly, gripping his pistol. The truck stopped a few yards away and a single man stepped out, one of Miguel's. No gun in hand, no aggression, a messenger. Lucas walked forward, his steps slow, controlled. The man tossed a small device onto the dirt, a burner phone. "El Cobra wants you to hear this," he said. Lucas picked up the phone, pressed play. Miguel's voice crackled through the speaker. "Lucas, my friend." His tone was taunting, smug. "Your wife is safe, for now. But you have a choice. You come to me alone, no tricks. Or I start sending her back to you, piece by piece." Lucas's grip tightened around the phone. His breathing was steady, but his blood boiled. "I know who you are now," Miguel continued. "Lucas Duarte doesn't exist. But the man you used to be, the one they called El Fantasma, that man does. And I wonder, how long can he keep pretending to be just a farmer?" The message ended. Lucas tossed the phone aside. The messenger didn't move. "Tell your boss," Lucas said, his voice cold. "I'm coming." The man nodded, returning to his truck. Within moments, he was gone. Raimundo let out a breath. "So what's the plan?" Lucas looked toward the horizon where Sophia was being held. "I do what I was trained to do." Because Miguel Navarro had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the man Lucas Duarte used to be. The night was darker than usual, the sky devoid of moonlight, a perfect cover for what Lucas was about to do. He moved through the house with quiet efficiency, checking his gear. Every weapon, every bullet had to be accounted for. This wasn't a fight he could afford to lose. Raimundo stood by the doorway, shotgun slung over his shoulder. "You sure you want to do this alone?" Lucas nodded as he secured a knife to his belt. "They're expecting me to walk in like a desperate man." He glanced up, eyes hard. "They don't know who they're dealing with," Raimundo grunted. "Then let's remind them." Lucas gave him a long look. "This isn't your fight." The old ranch hand smirked. "Could have fooled me." Lucas didn't argue. He simply handed Raimundo a sidearm. They had no time for goodbyes. Infiltrating the compound. The cartel's hideout was an abandoned processing plant deep in the valley, surrounded by dense forest. Lucas had scouted the location years ago, back when he was still in the business of eliminating men like Miguel. He knew every entrance, every blind spot. Using the cover of trees, he approached from the east, his movements swift and precise. 2 sentries stood near the entrance, rifles in hand. Lucas crept closer, silent as a shadow. One swift motion, a blade across the throat. The second guard turned just in time for Lucas to jam a silencer against his temple. A quiet pop, and he crumpled. Lucas dragged the bodies into the brush before signaling to Raimundo, who was positioned further out, providing overwatch. The next phase began. The hunt begins inside. The plant was a maze of rusted machinery and dimly lit corridors. Voices echoed from deeper within, cartel members laughing, shouting. They had no idea a storm was about to descend upon them. Lucas moved methodically, taking out guards one by one. A suppressed shot to the back of the skull, a knife driven between the ribs. Every move was surgical, precise. Then he heard her. Sophia, her voice muffled, came from a room up ahead. He quickened his pace, adrenaline spiking. 2 more guards stood outside the door. Lucas didn't hesitate. A single shot took one down, while the other barely had time to react before Lucas lunged, driving his knife into his chest. The door was locked. Lucas stepped back, raised his boot, and kicked it open. Rescuing Sophia, Sophia sat tied to a chair, a bruise forming on her cheek. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Lucas!" He rushed to her, cutting the ropes. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her hands trembled. "We have to go, Miguel, A slow clap interrupted them. Lucas turned, gun raised. Miguel stood in the doorway, flanked by 3 armed men. "I knew you'd come," he said, grinning. "The ghost returns." Lucas positioned himself in front of Sophia. "Let her go, Miguel." Miguel smirked. "And miss the chance to see what you really are?" He gestured to the blood on Lucas's hands. "You can't hide from it. This is who you are." Lucas didn't answer. Then the lights went out. A gunshot rang through the darkness, followed by a scream. Raimundo had made his move. Chaos erupted. Lucas grabbed Sophia's hand. "Run!" She bolted past the guards while Lucas spun, firing 2 shots, both clean kills. Miguel cursed, ducking behind a crate. More men rushed in, but Lucas was already moving. He weaved through the confusion, taking them down with deadly precision. A final shot, and the room fell silent. Lucas turned. Miguel was gone. The fight wasn't over yet. Lucas clenched his jaw. This was personal now, and he wasn't leaving without ending it. Smoke and blood filled the air. The gunfire had stopped, but Lucas knew the fight wasn't over. Miguel was still alive. Sophia clung to his arm, her breath ragged. "Lucas, we have to go." He turned to her, eyes fierce but steady. "Not yet." Raimundo appeared in the doorway, his rifle still smoking. "Most of them are dead or running." He glanced at Lucas. "But Miguel, he's waiting for you." Lucas nodded. "Take Sophia out of here." "No!" Sophia's grip tightened. "I'm not leaving you." Lucas cupped her face, his voice softer now. "You have to. Trust me." She hesitated, but the certainty in his eyes left no room for argument. With a final glance, she followed Raimundo out. Now it was just Lucas and Miguel. The final confrontation. Lucas moved through the ruins of the processing plant, his steps deliberate. He knew exactly where Miguel would go, the warehouse. The doors were already open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, fire flickered from fallen lanterns, casting long shadows over the rusted metal beams. The stench of oil and death hung thick, and there, standing in the center, was Miguel. His black leather jacket was streaked with dust and blood, but his smirk remained, a pistol in one hand, a cigar in the other. "Took you long enough." Lucas raised his weapon. "It ends here." Miguel exhaled smoke, unfazed. "You think you can just kill me and walk away?" He gestured around them. "This isn't just about me, Phantasma. My people will come, the cartel will come. You'll never escape it." Lucas's grip tightened. "Then I'll make sure there's nothing left of you to come back for." Miguel chuckled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Then he moved, fast. A gunshot cracked through the air. Lucas barely dodged, rolling behind a steel column as Miguel's bullet whizzed past. He returned fire, hitting Miguel's shoulder, but the cartel leader only laughed through gritted teeth. "You still got it," Miguel taunted, crouching behind a stack of crates. "But you're getting old, my friend." Lucas ignored the taunt, keeping his breathing steady. He knew Miguel was trying to bait him. Another shot. Sparks flew as the bullet ricocheted off metal. Lucas moved in silence, circling the warehouse, waiting for his opening. The flames were growing, licking at the walls, feeding on spilled fuel. Miguel reloaded, but in that split second of vulnerability, Lucas struck. He lunged forward, knocking the gun from Miguel's hand. The 2 men collided, fists swinging, bones cracking. Miguel landed a hit to Lucas's ribs. Pain exploded, but Lucas didn't stop. He drove his knee into Miguel's stomach, sending him stumbling back. Miguel spat blood, eyes burning with fury. "You should have stayed buried." Lucas didn't answer. He simply grabbed Miguel by the collar and slammed him into a rusted beam. Miguel grunted, struggling, but Lucas didn't let up. He pressed the barrel of his pistol against Miguel's chest. For the first time, Miguel's smirk wavered. "You don't have to do this," he rasped. "We're the same, you and I." Lucas's finger hovered over the trigger. Then he heard Sophia's voice in his head. "I don't even know who I married." His grip tightened. He had spent years trying to escape this part of himself. But standing here with Miguel Navarro at his mercy, he realized the truth. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a man who had something to live for. Lucas lowered his gun. Miguel laughed until Lucas struck. A final brutal punch sent Miguel collapsing into the flames. His screams echoed as the fire swallowed him whole. Lucas turned, walking away as the warehouse began to collapse. The past was dead, and he wasn't looking back. The sun rose over the ranch, casting a golden glow over the land that had nearly been lost. Smoke still curled from the distant ruins of the cartel's hideout, but the war was over. Miguel was dead, his men scattered. Lucas stood by the porch, the weight of the past week pressing down on his shoulders. His body ached, his wounds were bandaged, but the deepest scars weren't the ones on his skin. They were the ones left in his mind. Sophia stepped beside him, her presence quiet but steady. She hadn't spoken much since they'd returned. Not about the blood, the fire, or the man she had seen Lucas become. "How's Raimundo?" Lucas asked. "He'll be fine," Sophia replied. "He's already out in the fields as if nothing happened." She glanced at him. "Not all of us can move on so easily." Lucas exhaled, rubbing his temple. "I never wanted this to touch our lives." "But it did," she said, voice softer. "And now we have to decide what comes next." Picking up the pieces, Raimundo joined them a few minutes later, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Barn's a mess, fences need fixing, and half the cattle ran off during the attack." He took a slow drag. "Guess we should get started." Lucas chuckled dryly. No rest for the wicked. They spent the next few days rebuilding. The barn was patched, the fences reinforced. The ranch still bore scars from the battle, but it would heal, just as they would. Yet something lingered in the air, an unspoken truth that neither Lucas nor Sophia could ignore. One night, as they sat together on the porch, Sophia finally broke the silence. "You were going to kill him." Lucas didn't look at her. "I had to end it." "But you didn't." She studied him, her gaze searching for something he wasn't sure he could give. "You stopped yourself." Lucas ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to become that man again," Sophia exhaled. "But you are him, Lucas. You always were. You just buried it." He turned to her. "Does that scare you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I don't know, but I know I don't want to lose you." He squeezed her hand gently. "You won't." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. The shadow that remains days turned into weeks. The ranch slowly returned to normal, but Lucas remained on edge. One evening, as he finished repairing the last section of fence, Raimundo approached. His expression was unreadable. "We got a problem," he said, handing Lucas a small package. Lucas opened it. Inside was a phone, new, untraceable. The screen lit up with a single message. "You think it's over? We're watching." A slow dread coiled in Lucas's chest. The cartel. Miguel might be gone, but the machine he had been part of still moved. Raimundo crossed his arms. "So what do we do?" Lucas stared at the message for a long moment before crushing the phone under his boot. "We rebuild," he said. "And we prepare." Sophia stepped out onto the porch, watching them. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. Their war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Sometimes the past isn't something we can outrun. It's a part of who we are. Lucas tried to bury his past life, but when faced with losing everything he loved, he had to embrace the very skills he once abandoned. In the end, he didn't just fight for survival. He fought to protect the future he had built. But at what cost? Would you have made the same choices, or would you have walked away? Click on the video on your screen to continue this journey of self-discovery and explore what it truly means to face your past. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge your perspective. See you in the next one.